The Medium, a Poland-set horror adventure by Bloober Team, starts at the very end, with the main character, Marianne, telling the story of the game to someone, starting with the vision of a man shooting a girl on a pier. The story she tells is disjointed, with multiple timelines, characters, and planes of existence being explored. In order to make it as coherent as possible, I'm going to lay out the events of the story in chronological order, and then offer some theories about what exactly happened at the end of the game. The game's timeline begins in Poland during World War II, with the story of two children. Richard, a 13-year-old boy whose father is killed fighting the Nazis, and Thomas, a 3-year-old medium. They wouldn't meet for more than a decade, but their lives are inescapably intertwined. We'll start with Richard. His life is shattered after his father is killed. His mother remarries a brutal man, and Richard's life becomes a nightmare of constant abuse. One of the few bright spots is his relationship with Rose, a young Jewish girl being hidden in the basement of a neighbor. They get together in a garden between the houses, where Richard brings her food and they play together, attempting to forget for at least a moment the horror they're living in. Unfortunately, Richard's stepfather is a traitor to Poland, and he gives the location of Rose's family to the Nazis for a reward. Richard finds Rose's dead body in the garden and is shattered. Later, Richard's mother turns her husband into the partisans, and he's hanged while Richard watches. The trauma of this parade of horrors damages Richard in ways that won't reveal themselves for years. Now we move on to Thomas, a 3-year-old child already demonstrating the ability to speak to the dead. I'll quickly lay out the rules of mediums in the world of the game. Mediums' powers originate from the fact that their souls are split into two halves, one living in the material world, the other in the spiritual realm. They're the same person, but act independently of one another. The spirit half of mediums talk with the departed, and then pass messages along to their other halves. Mediums can hear their spirit selves all the time, but can only see them in reflective surfaces like mirrors, windows, or still water. The Nazis kidnap Thomas and begin to perform experiments on him. They quickly lose the war, and during the Russian push into Poland, the Red Army discovers the lab where experiments were being done on Thomas, and decide to continue researching his powers. This continues until Thomas is in his late teens. While being experimented on, he has developed his powers to the point where he gains the ability to send his spirit self into the psyches of other living people. Once inside, Thomas's spirit can banish a person's soul from their body, leaving them a mindless husk. Thomas does that to the research staff and soldiers holding him captive, and manages to escape the lab. He flees to Poland and gets lost in the big city, taking on a new identity and trying to keep a low profile. It's at this point that Thomas meets Richard for the first time. Thomas was looking for a way to come to terms with both his abilities and history of abuse. Richard, an artist by trade, befriended him as he became fascinated with Thomas's imagination and used it as inspiration for his art. Over time, the two men gradually grew apart. Richard became a successful artist, and used his pull with the government to get Thomas, a trained architect, a position managing the construction of the Niwa resort. During construction, Thomas finds out about an old bomb shelter under the property, and has his family residence built on top of it so that he'll have a private place to continue his research into his powers. Thomas's first daughter, Liliane, proves to have the same abilities he does, with a spirit self able to move freely around the spirit realm and communicate with her earthbound other half. His second daughter, Marianne, is quite different, however. Her mother dies giving birth to her, which has the effect of weakening the border between worlds, just as Marianne is becoming conscious. The result is that, unlike other mediums, Marianne's soul isn't split into two pieces. She has a single identity, but lives in both the spirit world and the material world simultaneously. Suddenly a single parent, Thomas has trouble managing his job, his research, and raising two children. During this time, Thomas creates a safe room in the bunker, completely lined with salt. By going inside, he's able to block his connection to the spirit world and prevent his spirit self from communicating with him, leaving him alone for the first time in his life. Some years later, Thomas receives word that his friend Richard is having career troubles. He invites the painter to work at the resort, so he'll have a place to live while continuing to paint. This proves to be a crucial mistake, as Richard, after arriving, becomes obsessed with Lily, Thomas's 10-year-old daughter. He approaches her in the guise of a friend who will look out for her in a way that her distracted father can't. But his attentions quickly become sinister, and he begins molesting her regularly. This trauma emotionally cripples Lily, causing her spirit self to split into two pieces. Sadness, a little girl locked at the physical and emotional age she was when the abuse started, and the Maw, a horrible creature that she pours all of her hatred, shame, and fury into. The Maw steadily grows in power, constantly whispering to Lily, trying to convince her to let it use its powers to take revenge on anyone who hurt her. Lily knows right from wrong, and is afraid of what the Maw might do if she lets it, so she keeps it contained as best she can. After far too long, Thomas finds out about Richard's crimes, and in a fit of rage, has his spirit self dive into Richard's psyche. There he finds out all of the tragic details of Richard's past, but is unmoved by the realization. Spirit Thomas is angrier and crueler than the normal Thomas because, like Lily's relationship with the Maw, he pours all of his dark thoughts and impulses into his spirit half. Spirit Thomas finds the core of Richard's personality, a frightened little boy still trapped in the Second World War, and tears it away, leaving Richard a zombified husk. Thomas assigns a nurse at the hotel, Ursula, to look after Richard. What he doesn't know is that Ursula was romantically obsessed with Richard, and was distraught when he rejected her advances. Meanwhile, a report on Richard's unique illness, becoming a walking shell of a man despite the lack of any chemical or physical changes in his brain, reaches the Polish security services. It sets off alarm bells there, as it perfectly matches the injuries that Thomas caused to the researchers and soldiers when he was escaping the lab decades earlier. Henry, a special investigator, is dispatched to the Niwa resort in the hopes of locating the army's long-lost psychic guinea pig. Henry quickly figures out that Thomas is the man he's looking for and ambushes Thomas in the workshop next to his house. Thomas won't admit to being a medium or use his powers, though, so Henry attempts to get him angry enough that he'll have no choice but to reveal himself. So he grabs a can of gasoline and sets Thomas's house on fire, with Lily and Marianne still inside of it. This finally forces Thomas to use his powers. He sends his spirit self inside the agent's psyche. But Spirit Thomas isn't prepared for what he finds there. Henry had been abused by his violent criminal father his entire life, warping him down to his core. He's a pure psychopath and has no innocent inner self for Spirit Thomas to attack, and as a result, Spirit Thomas winds up trapped inside Henry's psyche. Back in the material world, Thomas overpowers Henry and rushes to save his daughters, but seeing the house completely engulfed in flames, he realizes that he's too late, and in a fit of rage, he murders Henry, possibly by burning him alive, although we don't see it happen. What Thomas doesn't know is that his daughters have miraculously survived the fire. When the fire started, the Maw came to Lily and revealed that it could use its powers to drag the two girls out of the burning house if she would let it. But doing so would set the Maw free to do whatever it wanted. Desperate to save herself and her sister, and on some level desperate to give in to the Maw's demands, Lily agrees to its terms, and it uses its powers to help them escape. Marianne is still horribly burned by the fire, however, and once he finds them, Thomas immediately rushes his younger daughter to the hospital. While Thomas is gone, the Maw sets its plans in motion. Not satisfied with merely diving into people's psyches the way Spirit Thomas does, the Maw wants to possess people and use their bodies to live out its violent fantasies. It finds its first host in Ursula, probably due to her proximity to Richard. Richard winds up being the Maw's first victim. Ursula cuts him open with a knife and then goes on a rampage, brutally stabbing and slashing her way through as many people as she can before finally burning out. The Maw can't possess anyone for very long because their bodies can't handle the trauma of having an angry spirit inside them. The Maw burns their spirits out of them, killing them and leaving a withered husk behind. Thomas returns to Niwa and finds the scene of carnage. He discovers that Lily is responsible and quickly brings her down to the bunker, isolating her in the salt room. With its connection to Lily blocked, the Maw can't act, so it remains trapped in the spirit realm, its fury constantly growing. The government covers up the news of the massacre and shuts Niwa down, leaving Thomas in charge of maintaining the property. He allows Francis, the groundskeeper, to remain as well, largely because the man has nowhere else to go. Deciding that she'll be safer away from him and Lily, Thomas leaves Marianne in the hospital, assuming the foster care system will be able to deal with her. This winds up having severely negative results, because there's no one to explain Marianne's powers to her, leading her to think that it's completely normal to see a spirit world and talk to ghosts. She gets bounced from one family to the next, her strange behavior always resulting in her getting moved on. Finally, she finds a permanent foster father in Jack, who runs a funeral home. Spending all of his time around death has prepared him to be more patient with Marianne's odd habits, and she winds up fitting in quite well at the funeral home, helping operate the business in the material world and ushering confused souls to the great beyond in the spirit realm. Thomas checks in on Marianne from time to time, taking photographs of her from a distance. But mostly he spends his time researching the spirit world and his own powers. He's driven to find a way to stop the Maw, and maybe even rescue Spirit Thomas, who he's sure is still alive somewhere, because if Thomas was dead, he'd be the same kind of withered husk that Richard was reduced to. His plan is to find a way to physically transport himself into the spirit world, and after nearly 20 years of searching, he manages to figure out how to do it. Now we have to briefly discuss Francis, the groundskeeper. He has a habit of sending his family postcards expressing his wish that they come live with him at Niwa, while lamenting that it isn't possible for them to do so. It's likely that his family is actually dead, and these letters are simply a coping mechanism, which would explain why all of the postcards are returned to sender and wind up lying around the resort for the player to find. Missing his family desperately, over a 15-year period, Francis becomes fixated on the fact that Thomas is keeping Lily locked away in the bunker. Not understanding the threat she poses, Francis waits until Thomas is away and tries to rescue Lily, but only winds up setting the Maw free. It immediately possesses Francis, but since there's no one around to murder, all it's able to do is to get him to kill himself in a gruesome fashion. The Maw wants to possess Marianne, believing that her unique ability as a medium to be in both realities at once will allow her to serve as a stable host, permitting it to live in the real world as a person independent from Lily. It's not strong enough to attack her just yet, however, so it bides its time, possessing and draining animals in the forest to grow stronger. Thomas discovers that the Maw has been set free, and since he can't fight it, he phones Marianne, finally making contact with her. He tells her that if she comes to Niwa, he can explain her past to her, and that she's the only one who can stop it. He's maddeningly unclear about just what it is, however. After getting off the phone, Thomas jumps into the spirit world, maybe to escape the Maw, maybe in the hopes of finding his spirit self. We don't see Thomas again, so it's impossible to tell for sure. Marianne travels to the resort, and the main action of the game plays out. She meets her sister in the form of Sadness and the Maw, although she doesn't initially realize that both are merely different aspects of the same person. Eventually she encounters the Child Eater, a hideous monstrosity that represents all of the evil that Richard did, the pure hate and anger left after Spirit Thomas destroyed everything innocent in the man. Marianne banishes the Child Eater and continues her investigation, eventually finding out about Henry, the fire, and the fact that the Maw is really her sister. Marianne then encounters Henry's spirit in the form of a monstrous dog. She banishes it, and in doing so sets Spirit Thomas free after 16 years. Although time moves much more slowly when he's inside other people's psyches, so who knows how long it was for him. It's then revealed that the framing device of the game, in which Marianne is telling the story to someone, was her having a conversation with Spirit Thomas while in the bunker. Marianne discovers that her sister is still alive, which is why the Maw can't be banished. It has a solid connection to a living person in the material world. Marianne finds her sister on the dock from her recurring dream, and Lily reveals that the dream in which she's killed was a recurring fantasy of hers. She believes that if her father had killed her all of those years ago, it would have been better for everyone. And she asks Marianne to kill her so that the Maw can be dealt with once and for all. Marianne hesitates, not ready to kill the family that she'd just discovered. She tries to find another way out, threatening to kill herself, which would permanently foil the Maw's plans to live as a real person. Marianne then remembers Spirit Thomas telling her that not everyone can be saved. The screen cuts to black, and we hear a gunshot. So, what happened? Who did Marianne shoot, if anyone? It's not particularly likely that she shot herself, because there's simply no upside for having done so. Not only would she be dead, but the Maw would be free to go on killing. So did she shoot Lily and banish the Maw? That's the more likely of the two options, although having to kill her sister is certainly a rough outcome. There is, however, a third option. Perhaps someone else fired a shot? At the end of the game, we have this brief scene where Thomas picks up his watch inside the spirit realm, confirming that Thomas made it to the other side. Given that time can move strangely in the spirit realm, is it possible that Spirit Thomas managed to find Thomas, rescue him, and bring him back to the real world in time to intervene in the conflict between his daughters? After all, the Maw is just an aspect of Lily's personality, and if Spirit Thomas was able to become less violent and aggressive while being locked away for over a decade, maybe there's some hope that they can save the Maw as well. Unfortunately, there's no way to know for sure unless Bloober Team decides to make a sequel. So that's the story of Medium, a depressing journey through grief, trauma, and abuse. Seriously though, great work on the game, Bloober Team. I can't wait to see what you come up with next. I've been the Hidden Object Guru. Thanks for coming on this journey with me. If you had a good time and you'd like to see more, there's buttons on the screen to help you with that. Special thanks go out to my Patreons Desire and Marissa, who make videos like this possible. I'll see you back here for the next thing, but until then, au revoir.